world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Wednesday, November 12th, as you are listening to this, and we've got a lot to talk about. Now, today, the House is going to reconvene roughly around 4 p.m. Eastern, and then they are going to begin the work of negotiating, debating, amending, changing everything about this Senate-passed resolution to open the government. Now, we've been talking about what's going on with this bill. As it sits, this bill would extend SNAP benefits to September 30th. This would extend, I believe, payments for all essential government workers through September 30th, and it would fund military pay through September 30th. So none of that would be a factor if the government gets shut down again. Now, the rest of the government would be funded until January 30th. And then at that point, if things go sideways, the government could get shut down again, but certain things would not be affected. Now, the other thing in this bill, and Donald Trump has signaled that he would probably sign it, but we know Donald Trump changes his mind on a whim, is that there is a provision in here that would bring back all of the fired federal employees that Donald Trump used the shutdown to let go. Now, a big chunk of those firings were put on hold because of different legal actions where the courts are saying no because of varying union deals and union contracts and federal contracts, etc. No, you cannot just mass fire these people just because the government shut down. And almost all of Donald Trump's layoffs and firings have been reversed by the courts, or said, no, we got to look at that, and things get changed. And even some of the ones that didn't, ultimately they come back around and they try to rehire those people because they realize they're actually needed, because you have people making hiring and firing decisions who don't entirely know what is going on with the government and what some of these people are. For example, they fired some of the people that oversee and maintain the safety and functionality of our nuclear stockpile. Well, that is not somebody you can hire anybody off the street for. That is a very skilled position where you have to keep a certain number of people doing that job, and you can't just find anybody to replace them, and especially you can't just hire them off the street at minimum wage. It is a skilled position that requires a certain amount of pay for what you are doing. And this administration is finding that out the hard way. Now, Donald Trump being a businessman, I'm sure we've all worked for companies where they view personnel as interchangeable and everybody is replaceable. And I think Donald Trump has that problem when it comes to a lot of things. Remember what happened before the pandemic when Donald Trump took over as president. Barack Obama had given him the pandemic response playbook, and part of that was having the pandemic response team, which was basically a team of doctors that was there that could start research, etc. They were looking ahead about pandemics, but they were also there to start doing the research, etc., to prevent pandemics from going, from even happening. And Donald Trump came back out and said, well, we're letting them all go. We don't need them. We don't hire people to sit around. Well, when there is an issue, we'll hire doctors then. We're not going to pay people to sit around. Problem is, you don't get the type of quality doctors that are specialized in their fields when you do that, because they've taken lucrative jobs elsewhere. They're in the private sector at that point. And see, people forgot what happens when you let Donald Trump make hiring and firing decisions. things go sideways. All right, so the House is going to be making changes to this bill, more than likely. There are several things in this bill that are going to be coming up that the House either doesn't like or that they just may make an attempt at changing. Now, any changes they make have to go back to the Senate, and the Senate has to vote on it again because both bills, both versions of the bills, must be identical. And as far as I am aware, that includes all language. Like it has to be word for word identical before it can go to Donald Trump's desk to be signed. So the House is going to be debating this, and this may take most of the week to get this to a point where they are ready to vote on it. And if they make any changes, it goes back to the Senate to get voted on for those changes. Now, unless it's a wording change, if it's a significant change, the Senate's going to have a chance to redebate it and everything. Now, the Senate may vote on it with any of the changes, and because of the backlash that certain Democrats got, the 8 that voted in favor to advance this bill, if it comes back with any changes, they may not vote for it again because this isn't what they agreed to. So we'll see what changes the House makes over the next couple of days, and then what happens when it goes back to the Senate. Now, I have been saying there could be a couple things going on here. Remember when they passed the one big beautiful bill? Lisa Murkowski in the Senate said, well, it wasn't done. She was hoping the House would finish it, would vote on it, amend it, and send it back and make it better. House didn't do that at the time. They just passed the version the Senate did. But that's not the point. Point is, she was hoping the House would fix it. Well, this could be a situation where they did the same thing. And it's entirely possible that Senate Democrats, the ones that voted to cave, had talked to enough people in the House, because it only takes like 3 or 4 Republicans to side with all Democrats to pass anything to change this bill. That there could be enough that want to add things to this bill or change things that could put things in there that would make it much better. Okay, and now we are hearing that House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is wanting to push forward an amendment that would extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies at their current levels for 3 years. And they want to tack that on to this bill. Now, I had been saying they were probably going to try this. Now, I don't know if there will be enough votes to get it passed. But there could be several Republicans that say, okay, this is going to be bad for their own state, for their own district, if they don't vote to pass it. So they could pass this. Maybe not 3 years. Maybe they get 2. Maybe they even just get a year and they get a chance to negotiate it again at the next government shutdown. Maybe they get a chance to negotiate it, in September. Who knows? We'll have to see how that plays out. But the fact is they are going to be bringing it up for a vote and trying to make these changes. Now, is Mike Johnson going to stop some of this? I don't know that he's going to be able to, because they need to get this passed. So I think he's going to allow attempts to amend this, and he's going to hope that the changes fail on numbers votes alone, that the Republicans stick together and they just kill these things. I don't think he can just straight deny votes for some of these amendments. So I think it's going to have a lengthy amendment process. Maybe a day, maybe 2. Might even take till Friday. I'm not sure. Because, anything can happen in the House of Representatives. All right. So they're going to attempt to do that. But I think when it gets said and done and they make things better, it's going to go back to the Senate. Now, what happens when it hits the Senate? Well, I think the Democrats are going to hold the line and vote in favor of any version of the bill that has the Affordable Care Act subsidies on it. And Republicans have been getting hammered about wanting to end the Affordable Care Act subsidies. So there's a chance that they pass this with the subsidies included when it gets to the Senate. And then they can just blame the House, see, and make it so that, well, we didn't tack it on, we didn't vote for it, but it was very important that we open the government, so we just agreed. One thing about politics, if you haven't noticed, is that a lot of them like to play the deniability game where, well, I didn't do that, I didn't tack it on there, but oh, it was actually a good thing, so I'm voting for it because I need everything else attached with it. Or they like to take credit for things they were actually against. How many Republicans, both senators and members of the House of Representatives, have gone back to their states, their districts, and taken credit for things that were made possible because of the infrastructure deal that Joe Biden passed? A lot. They vote against the infrastructure deal, get pissed at them for using the rules of the Senate and passing it on party lines basically without any Republicans, and say, well, oh, it was a horrible thing. Why would they do that? Why would they do that? And then when they get to their districts and their districts are getting money, they take credit for it. Um, Now, one of the other things with this government bill, the fund the government, that House members are pissed about is that there is a provision in there that would allow certain senators, certain Republican senators, to sue the government and the DOJ because they got their phones wiretapped. Now, we haven't talked a lot about this wiretap story, but as part of his investigation into January 6th, Jack Smith got a judge to sign off with a warrant, as far as I'm aware, the ability to tap certain members of Congress's phones, senators and members of the House of Representatives that were Republican, that were involved, at least potentially, with January 6th and what was going on. And I don't know which ones were included, because I don't remember right off the top of my head. But what they are saying here is that certain senators who's had their phones wiretapped would be allowed to sue the DOJ. Well, that's similar to what Donald Trump is trying to do with a demand letter to the DOJ saying, well, your investigation into me over January 6th is, it hurt me and, gave me all this emotional distress and all of the bullshit that he has said. And he puts out a demand letter for $230 million. And he thinks that they should just sign off on it and pay this settlement. Now, I think a court would have to agree to that, and I don't think that's going to happen because it was a lawful investigation. And there was evidence uncovered enough to get criminal charges against certain people. And even in the amount of what he found in his investigation, he had said that Jack Smith said that he was going after Donald Trump first, and there would be additional indictments of co-conspirators later. So because he was investigating, it was a legal wiretap. But they're mad that they got caught and they got found out here. So they want to be able to sue the government. Well, remember, if they sue the government and win any amount of money, well, who pays that? Taxpayers. Us. The money we kick into the coffers goes into the federal government. And you remember, we don't function on a surplus. We're in deficit spending. We have been for 25 years, basically, since George W. Bush was president. We spend more than we bring in. So we're not paying down any debts. And as fast as it comes in, it goes out making interest payments on the loans that we already have out. We're constantly doing that. And we're trying to pay down, or not even pay down, just float the interest that we already have. Well, if they sue and get some kind of a judgment, that means we have to go out, borrow more money to cover that lawsuit payment that they are talking about, whatever amount of money that is. Okay. And there are some House Republicans that are very pissed about this deal. They're not mad that the Senate Republicans have the potential to sue the government. Oh no, they're not mad about that part of it. A few of them are. But what they're mad about is that the provision in there only allows for senators that had their phones wiretapped to do it. There's no provision for members of the House. So they may try to manipulate that and change that so they can sue as well. But again, same problem. If they're allowed to do that, that money comes from the American taxpayer. Now, I think there should be all sorts of investigations again when a Democrat is back into office, and if there is still time with the statute of limitations, anybody that can or should be charged from January 6th, that should happen. They need to face accountability for everything they've done. And if there is any way they can be charged criminally for what they've done, they should. And I don't know, there are rules about not being able to charge sitting members of Congress for speech and debate on the House floor, the Senate floor, things like that when they're talking and debating legislation. But I don't know if there's a way to charge them for something like this where they have granted themselves the ability to sue the government over something where they were actually being investigated for a crime. And if they get a payout out of it, I don't know if there is any sort of legal ramifications that could come about when a Democrat is back in office. But these people aren't thinking that far ahead. Okay. So they're going to be looking at trying to, figure out this whole government funding deal. And once the House passes whatever version of it they're going to pass, and it may come with changes like we've talked about. Now, if they pass it, great. Then it goes back to the Senate if there's any changes. The Senate gets a chance to vote on it. If the Senate makes any changes at all, it has to go back to the House. And we could be going back and forth for another week. But I really think, depending on what comes out of this, that maybe it will only go to the Senate, gets passed, goes to Donald Trump's desk, and gets signed. Now, he has already indicated that he would agree and sign anything that comes out of this bipartisan deal to reopen the government. In part, I think he just wants the win from opening the government back up. All right, now with this deal to open the government, when they come back into session, it is going to be at or around 4 p.m. Eastern today. Now, when they do that, one of the things we have been waiting for will be, and this is going on 50 days, almost 2 months, Representative Grijalva of Arizona is going to be sworn in. Finally, she will be sworn into her seat. Now, Mike Johnson has been trying to play the delay game for as long as he can possibly get away with to avoid swearing her in. Okay, now why? Because he doesn't want to have her be a member of Congress where she can put her name on the discharge petition and force a vote on the Epstein files. Now, why doesn't he want that to happen? Well, because Donald Trump doesn't want to vote on the Epstein files. He has said any member of Congress that's a Republican that signs the discharge petition, which was brought forward by a Republican, Thomas Massie, is saying that they are hostile to this administration and hostile to the president. And he doesn't want it brought up for a vote. Now, why would he try desperately to kill the Epstein files? Well, because he doesn't want anybody to know what's actually in there. Now, we are hearing from certain people who have seen some of the information in there. We haven't seen any of it yet, but there is indications that there are at least several pictures of Donald Trump sitting with very young underage girls, at least topless, sitting on his lap. And that is just the tip of the iceberg of what is in there. Now, Donald Trump is aware of how bad politically any of that would be. He's not remorseful for having done any of it, because when he talks about it, he says things like, well, you just don't understand what it was like in Palm Beach in the 90s. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't live in Palm Beach in the 90s. I was still in the middle of nowhere, Iowa. But being a man, what would he have been? 90s, 30 years ago, he would have been in his 40s. Being a man in your 40s and having underage young girls sitting on your lap topless was kind of frowned upon. And I'm exaggerating for effect. It was very frowned upon. Um, it just didn't. No, I don't think there was any spot in the country where it was considered acceptable, except maybe in the social circles that Donald Trump and people that like him that were friends with Jeffrey Epstein and that went to Epstein Island, etc., were a part of. They thought it was okay, but nobody else. Donald Trump does not want the Epstein files released, and Mike Johnson has been doing everything in his power to make sure that they do not get released, they do not see the light of day. So she's getting sworn in. That is going to schedule a vote for that. Mike Johnson cannot block this. There are some people out there suggesting that Mike Johnson may try to say, okay, well, you guys want the Affordable Care Act subsidies, make the discharge petition go away, and we'll get that passed. Here's the problem. He doesn't have the leverage he thinks he does, if that is what he's trying to do. And I'm not convinced that's what he's trying to do. Why? Well, he doesn't have the leverage because he's hanging by a thread at this point. Simple fact is his own party doesn't like him. He could be facing multiple calls for attempts to vacate the speakership chair. He doesn't have that kind of authority. And the other thing is a discharge petition is a way to go around the Speaker of the House. The whole point of a discharge petition is to avoid dealing with the Speaker when they or to bring something up that leadership does not want voted on. And that's where we're at here with this resolution to release the Epstein files. Now, as we've talked about, this vote will not automatically release the Epstein files. This is just about getting those members of Congress in the House of Representatives on record one way or the other and forcing them to answer, do you want to release the Epstein files or do you want to keep them hidden? Are you trying to protect people who do awful things to children? Or do you want them released so we know who they are? All right. Now, why does Mike Johnson want to keep them hidden? Well, because Donald Trump wants them hidden. Possibly Mike Johnson may be in there. So he doesn't want to vote because Republicans know how bad it is going to be on the record for voting for this bill. Okay? When they're on the record, then they have to go answer to their constituents, why'd you vote to keep the Epstein files hidden? The Republican MAGA voter wants the files released. Why? Because they have been told forever, for decades, I think at this point, that it is Democrats and left-leaning people that do all of these awful things to children. I mean, wasn't there a rumor going around when Hillary Clinton was running for president almost 10 years ago that they were sacrificing kids in the basement of a pizzeria that didn't even exist, something like that, and there was a section of this country that believed it. Just all sorts of awful things they've been told about Democrats and left-leaning people. They are convinced that that it is only going to be Democrats that are on the Epstein files. And they want the proof to finally own the libs, own the libtards, and show us how bad we really are. Now, they're going to be thrown off guard when it comes out with a Republican administration. See, and that's the other key thing. Now, people ask, why didn't Joe Biden release it? Well, because Joe Biden didn't have his hands in the DOJ. He appointed Merrick Garland. Merrick Garland was busy. Well, I would say he was busy investigating January 6th, but we know that was a lie. But he was running the DOJ. This was not forefront of the public, domain. They weren't talking about it nearly as much. Should they have been going after people? Yes. Were they? Doesn't appear like it. The only people that got arrested and charged at all so far with any connection to Epstein was Epstein himself, who then ultimately, when he was in prison, is claimed that he hung himself. That all doesn't make sense, but it happened. And then there was Ghislaine Maxwell. So, because Joe Biden wasn't the one talking about releasing the files, he didn't run on a campaign like that. Neither did Kamala Harris. Donald Trump ran on that campaign, and that's important because when the information comes out from a Republican-controlled DOJ and it has Republicans on it, it is going to be bad news for Republican voters are going to at least be able to sit there and some of them may try to spin it and say, well, Biden's DOJ planted all that evidence in there when they were in charge. Some of them will believe that. Others are going to look at it at face value going, okay, these motherfuckers, these Republicans, they are going to have to answer for some of that. And some people are going to be in a state of shock when it comes to what's going on, who's in the files, etc. Now, Mike Johnson is in a precarious place here. Okay. He has got problems coming up with this. As they swear in Representative Grijalva, there's going to be a vote on releasing the Epstein files. We've talked about that. So what could happen? Well, it's probably going to pass. The question's going to be by how big. Is it going to pass, with just the 218 votes that were on the discharge petition? Or is it going to pass maybe with 318 and 100 more Republicans go, oh shit, I don't want to answer to those voters. I'm going to vote to pass it. Well, how does that affect Mike Johnson? Mike Johnson's hanging by a thread. There's multiple people that are pissed at Mike Johnson. And if this thing passes, that would include Donald Trump. He could be facing multiple calls to vacate the speaker chair. And that the Republicans may want a different speaker. Now, if that happens before they pass any of this government funding bill and reopen the government, until they find a new speaker, if they vacate, then nothing gets done until they find a Speaker of the House. Okay? So which could drag the shutdown on. I don't know that they vacate ahead of them funding the government. Well, I've been talking about how Democrats could say to Mike Johnson, and now we hear that Hakeem Jeffries wants to put a 3-year ACA extension on the bill from the Senate. But what Democrats may have said to Mike Johnson behind closed doors is, get us the votes. You make sure that bill has a vote on the House floor and you get enough Republicans to agree. And there are multiple members of the House that are not seeking re-election, that will not have to answer to voters. So since passing the ACA is not necessarily a Republican politician, priority, they could turn around because they're not facing voters. Only takes 3 or 4 to pass it. Mike Johnson could go to him and say, look, vote in favor of it. Let's get this done. Let's open the government. Democrats would say, okay, in exchange, we'll save you if they try to vacate the chair. Democrats hold some cards here and they hold some leverage because the Republicans changed the rules when this current Congress started on January 3rd. It only takes like 5 or 6 Republicans to call for a motion to vacate the chair, which is what they need to have the vote. Okay. But assuming those 5 or 6 all vote to remove Mike Johnson, they're not enough on their own. But because the majority is so slim for Republicans in the House, all Democrats vote with those 5 or 6. Mike Johnson's gone. He loses his job as Speaker. Now, he would not be out of the House of Representatives. He would go back to being just a member. But he would go back to being a member, and they would have to find a new Speaker. Well, when they're looking for a new Speaker of the House, who's it going to be? I don't know that they can find anybody. And if they do it after they've funded the government's open, well, then they'd be on the clock trying to get one found before that January 30th new deadline for funding the government. Okay. But who could they find? I have no idea. It took them 3 weeks, the last time they were without a speaker, to come up with Mike Johnson. And prior to him becoming Speaker of the House, we had really no idea who Mike Johnson was. Unless you were in his district in Louisiana, you might have heard his name here and there, but he kind of stayed under the radar. Now, there are other members of the House that are in that same boat. And maybe the Republicans put up somebody that is not seeking reelection, which is entirely possible. But it could also come to a point, we've been talking about this as an option, where 4 or 5 Republicans say, look, we're tired of the bullshit and the games being played by Republican leadership. Mike Johnson kept the House out of session going on 6 or 7 weeks. And they may say, okay, we spent weeks trying to come up with a leadership plan, and we don't have anybody. Meanwhile, Democrats every time, because this is not just a party in charge vote, Democrats will get to put up somebody too. They keep coming up every single vote, like they did the last 2 times when they've had long drawn out fights to find a speaker. Hakeem Jeffries, 214 votes. Hakeem Jeffries, 214 votes. It would only take 4 to break ranks and 4 Republicans to go ahead and say, okay, we're going to put Hakeem Jeffries in as speaker. Now, that sounds like a harebrained idea. And on some levels, it is. I don't know the last time, and I don't know if it's ever happened, where the minority party got elected as Speaker of the House. But they could do it, because there's no rule that says the Speaker of the House has to be from the majority party. They could do it. And why would they put in Hakeem Jeffries even though he's in the minority? Because they want somebody that is going to run the House of Representatives and actually get things done. Keep them in session when they're supposed to be. Have them there to call votes. Call them back when there are problems. When there is issues. Like, for example, when there was, I don't remember if it was one of the hurricanes or what was going on, and there was worries that FEMA wasn't going to have enough money. And they were calling for Mike Johnson to bring the House back to vote on a package to add more funding for FEMA. He couldn't be bothered to do that. He said, no, we'll get to it when we get back to it. FEMA's got enough money right now. Things like that. They may want somebody who will call the House back to have these votes. If Hakeem Jeffries had been Speaker, even though he's in the minority, they would have been there negotiating and working all the way through this government shutdown, not taking an unscheduled, paid 6 to 7 week vacation because Mike Johnson didn't want to have them in session because he was trying to avoid a vote on the Epstein files. That was the big one. That, and he thought he was actually successfully putting pressure on Democrats in this government shutdown, and he really wasn't. I think, and maybe I'm wrong, we'll see how these votes play out, because he is not guaranteed a vote on a standalone ACA bill. Okay. The Senate has a guaranteed one when it came to opening the government, and Democrats accepted a promise for a vote later. Now, this wouldn't surprise me if they had a plan like what we were talking about earlier, where Hakeem Jeffries and other House Democrats are going to try to tack on the Affordable Care Act subsidies in the House to fix this bill. And as part of that, it wouldn't surprise me if, as part of those negotiations, Senate Democrats were talking to House Republicans and House Democrats to get something ready to go and something, so that they knew this would pass in the House when it got over to them. Okay. But if Hakeem Jeffries had been Speaker, even as the minority, they would have been there having these negotiations 7 weeks ago. They could have been doing this in September and potentially come up to this whole deal and maybe avoided the entirety of having the government shut down at all. and Democrats and Republicans could have come up with something they both could live with. But see, instead, it became a pissing contest between both sides. Mike Johnson was trying to pressure the Senate to do what he wanted them to do, and then he also was trying to avoid the Epstein files. So it's entirely possible that because of their lack of faith in Mike Johnson as a speaker, if the Republicans call to vacate, especially if the government is open, there's no reason for Democrats to turn around and save him. So unless they work out some kind of a deal with Mike Johnson saying, okay, we agree to save you if you do X, Y, and Z, maybe they do. But if they don't, they may have to go looking for a speaker. It may take 3 or 4 weeks. And as crazy as it sounds, with as ineffective as Republicans are at leading, and with as resigned to the fact they seem like they are anyway, that they are going to lose the midterms. You hear about how they talk about the midterms. Mike Johnson himself has talked about what is going to happen. Well, if the Democrats take the House in the midterms, they're going to impeach Donald Trump. Yeah, they probably will. Not because he's Donald Trump and because they don't like him, because Donald Trump has done things that would warrant impeachment. They talk about, like Steve Bannon was talking to that group of Republicans last week, where he said, if Democrats win the midterms and they win in 28, there's a bunch of us in this room that are going to prison. Well, why? Because you broke the law. So, with all of that being said, it is entirely possible when they get rid that they may vote out Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House. And beyond that, there's other reasons why they may vote him out as Speaker of the House. Donald Trump, even though he may sign whatever ultimately this deal looks like, if it includes the Affordable Care Act subsidies, etc., even though he may sign it, he may end up saying, well, I'm pissed at Mike Johnson for not holding the line, especially if the addition of the Affordable Care Act subsidies comes out of his chamber. Okay? Because he doesn't want them in there. They want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. Donald Trump thinks the better plan is to just send Americans a check. Basically, give the subsidy directly to the American taxpayer, let them go get their own insurance. Well, the problem with that is that if they do that, well, there's no guarantee that the American taxpayer is going to spend that money on health care. But the way Donald Trump described it is that they would send these subsidies to the American taxpayer. The American taxpayer would just put them in a bank account and just go pay the doctor directly when they need to go to the doctor. That works for somebody like Donald Trump who has millions or billions of dollars. I guarantee you, until he became president, I bet you he never had insurance. He never probably had to deal with it. When he needed something medically, I think he just went to the doctor, paid the bill, because it was a drop in the bucket to him. He is so out of touch with how the everyday American lives that they don't even know what's going on. But he could be pissed about having it look like they caved, especially out of the House of Representatives. So he could be the one calling up his MAGA friends in the House and saying, hey, get rid of Mike Johnson. Okay. But then you also have the vote on the Epstein files. Again, he doesn't want that thing to pass. Now, if it barely passes, he may leave Mike Johnson alone. But if 100 Republicans break ranks and vote to release the files, that's going to be an embarrassment to Donald Trump for something he wants us to believe there isn't anything there, that it's all just smoke and mirrors, it's a hoax, it's a Democratic plant, all of this bullshit that, he may try to, again, get them to vacate the chair. So with all that being said, there's multiple reasons why they may end up getting rid of Mike Johnson. And then we can't forget Marjorie Taylor Greene has a plan that already has a couple of co-sponsors on it to move to vacate the chair. By Thanksgiving, Mike Johnson may be out as Speaker of the House unless Democrats save him. And we've talked about what that may look like. And we'll have a better feel in the coming days for whether or not he's still going to be speaker. So, like I said, Democrats could end up saying, "Hey, Mike, you want to stay speaker, you want your party to not look weak and ineffective. Here's how we help you. We can save you, but you do X, Y, and Z for us." Seems like a crazy notion, but Democrats have done it before, and the Democrats are kind of crafty. So, in an interview Monday with Fox News, Donald Trump admitted something to Laura Ingraham, that he didn't have to tear down the East Wing, but he just wanted to. Well, and he said, "Why would I have, left the East Wing up and settled for an okay ballroom when I could have had a great ballroom?" Now, I'm probably twisting his words slightly, but that's effectively what he said. That he didn't have to tear down the East Wing. Now, initially, he had promised that when he built this ballroom, it was going to be touching but not connected in any way to like he wasn't going to have to tear down the East Wing. They were just going to have to take down a little bit of the facade to connect a walkway over to this ballroom. And this has been a relatively poorly received idea. A lot of people are pissed. One of the polls I saw on it said 54% of Americans disapprove of him tearing down the East Wing, while only 28% approve of it. And now when we find out he's admitting, yeah, I didn't have to tear down the East Wing, I just wanted to. Well, he did it in response, in my opinion, to the No Kings protest, because it was the same week after the No Kings protest. 7 to 10 million people were out on a Saturday, because what day of the week does matter, because a lot of people were not working. Now, Republicans will like to say, well, look at all those lazy Democrats who didn't have a job going out and protesting. No, it was just a Saturday. A lot of people don't work Saturdays. Now, there are a lot of industries that do, but a fair number don't. So, anyway, Donald Trump gets 7 to 10 million people out protesting against him. He gets embarrassed. He gets mad. And instead of saying, yeah, I'm going to stick with my original plan and he still could have built the same great ballroom without tearing down the East Wing. And I don't think it's great is his term. Okay. Don't care about this ballroom whatsoever. But he could have done it without touching the East Wing, other than the connecting corridor. But I think it was more of a response to the American people of, well, look what I can just do. I can just do it. Because he didn't go through any of the proper channels and just started demolishing the East Wing. And now he says, yeah, I didn't need to do that, but I chose to. This is going to be bad. Now, when it comes time for a Democrat to be back in office in 4 years, come January of 2029, because I think regardless of what happens with Donald Trump's term, I don't think he's going to, I don't think there's any way a Republican wins in 2028's general election. I just don't think it happens. I think a Democrat wins, unless Democrats completely shit the bed and fall apart between here and there. Now, one of the steps in potentially doing that is going to depend how everything we've been talking about up to this point in the podcast plays out. If they do get this Affordable Care Act subsidy tacked on, that definitely helps their chances in 28. If they fail and they allow Republicans to get rid of the ACA, that is going to be one of the problems that leads to potentially them not winning in 28. So we'll see. But one of the questions that has been asked has been, should we tie some kind of a loyalty test to the Democratic candidate for president, that he's going to tear down this ballroom and rebuild the East Wing? And I don't know if that is the most important issue to tie a candidate to. Don't get me wrong. Okay, it is important. We need to know what they're going to do. I think they probably should get rid of the ballroom, especially if it's not even close to done. Some estimates are saying it may be done in time. Of course, Donald Trump himself is saying it'll be done long before, but who knows? We don't know what this administration is going to actually do, and it's probably going to take taxpayer money to finish one way or the other. And it's going to take taxpayer money if they decide to get rid of it and go ahead and rebuild it, rebuild the East Wing. And it sounds like the cost for this thing is way going over what a standard budget for it would be. Okay. So that being said, I just don't think it is the biggest issue that we need to tie the Democratic candidate to. Okay. If that is the only thing, like the only reason we are voting for that particular candidate, we need to be paying attention to the other things that are going as far as why we want a particular candidate. It's important to get rid of the ballroom and rebuild the East Wing, in my opinion, but that shouldn't be the defining reason why we pick a candidate, because we could miss out on a great candidate who doesn't care enough one way or the other, or maybe it's not high priority, but is going to do a bunch of things like try to get universal health care and all of those things that we need. And if we skip over that person in favor of somebody who wants to kind of maintain the status quo, but they're gonna revert the White House back to how it looked before Trump, we missed the boat. We missed the point. We missed the priority there. So Donald Trump says he didn't need to tear down the East Wing. He wanted to. Just prove that he has no regard for history, no regard for anything, and he's worried about his legacy. He's worried about what people are going to think about him when he's gone. Now, he was also talking to Fox News, and he basically said his comments about not getting into heaven, he was joking or sarcastic or something like that. But he's bringing it up again, which means he's probably thinking about his health. And, with all of these things that he's had going on recently, the weird gaffes and the weird things he says and the way he looks, and there's people speculating that he's actually on a heart monitor now. He's got his ankle issue, and the fact that he disappears for a couple of days at a time every month, the bruising on his hands, the dementia concerns from some of the things he says, all of it ends up being a whole problem. We're worried about his health and everything going forward. And, I think he's worried about it too, as he is talking about, again, how he's joking about it. He's worried about building this ballroom, building an Arc de Triomphe, a whole bunch of things for his legacy makes us worried about his health. Speaking of Donald Trump's health, now I want to read this from the actual tweet or the Truth Social post that he made, but this is exactly what he is talking about here. He says, the Miracle Mile shopping center in Chicago, once considered our nation's best, now has a more than 28% vacancy factor and is ready to call it quits unless something is done about the murder and crime which is prevalent throughout the city. Call in the troops fast before it is too late. Now, he's talking about a mall in Chicago with a 28% vacancy rate, supposedly. Here's the thing, the Miracle Mile in Chicago doesn't exist. This mall is non-existent. So what's he talking about? He's making stuff up to make a point. Now, maybe he's getting confused about which shopping center, and maybe he's confusing the name of a mall from a different city. That's entirely possible. We've got malls all over the country. But there's no evidence that there is a mall in Chicago with a 28% vacancy rate due to crime. There are a lot of malls with a 50% or better vacancy rate because people don't shop at malls anymore. But see, Donald Trump is losing it as far as his cognitive ability. He's not living in 2025 in a lot of ways. He's, we talk about his dementia. They're giving him cognitive tests and things like that. I don't know that he's living in 2025. Maybe he's still thinking it's the 90s where malls were the thing. And if you're of a certain age like myself, you remember how malls were such a huge part of everything. Now I grew up in a small town. The mall we had was non-existent, basically. It was not a hangout spot for us kids and teenagers, because it was all of 10 stores, and it wasn't really anything special. What was special, what I remember, is driving to one of the bigger cities that had a bigger mall, and it was just full of people everywhere shopping. That was the big thing. And then, of course, technology came around, and now we have access to websites and, ordering apps and things like Amazon and all of that. And it has changed the dynamic of how people shop. They don't go to malls anymore. But Donald Trump is claiming this non existent Miracle Mile Mall in Chicago is under siege by crime. And it's always by crime, but he's never able to give any specifics. And when he does stuff like this where it's completely wrong and it's non-existent when he's trying to prove a point about how they need to save Chicago. And he wants to prove that he can send in the troops. Problem is, so far, the judges are saying, no, you can't send the troops into Chicago. As far as I have not seen anything that says any of the court orders that have prevented him from sending troops into Chicago have been lifted. But he wants to send the troops in because it's a show of force. He wants to look like the tough guy. Well, Donnie, you don't look like the tough guy. We've seen you in public. We've talked about your failing health and the fact that you sit there at some of these meetings and you start to doze and you start to jolt yourself awake and things like that. I remember watching my grandfather when he was suffering from dementia. We'd be sitting there visiting, and mid conversation, he'd just doze off. We'd keep talking. He'd wake himself back up 20 minutes, half an hour later, and no idea that he'd even fallen asleep. And that's kind of what I see out of Donald Trump at this point. He is struggling to keep himself awake in public. His face starts to droop. We have his looking like he's dragging his foot. Him having to be apparently led in various situations and led to the right spots to, handed things to sign, not even sure what he is signing. With some of his pardons, he doesn't even remember the day or two after that he pardoned them, who he pardoned or what crime they had committed or why. Just that they came highly recommended for a pardon. I mentioned it yesterday. The way he talks about some of these pardons, and then the way you see people telling him to sign something and what is in the thing he is signing, it reminds me of MASH and the first 3 seasons when you had Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake on the show. The number of times Radar would cover up the actual document and just get him to sign something or say, "Oh well, it's top secret. I don't know what's on it, but you should know because you're the boss." And that kind of buffoonery is what I think about when I see these people. As he goes to sign an executive order, for example, and he turns to the aide, "Which one's this?" Because he's not reading it, he doesn't know, and it has to be explained to him what's in there. Same thing that's going to happen with this bill if they do end up funding the government. That may be how he ends up signing it ultimately, even if the Democrats are able to get in this ACA extension. That if they don't tell him it's in there, he wouldn't notice. Or they could tell him, well, yeah, it's in there, but it's not as good as what the Democrats wanted. They could lie to him about it. He wouldn't know the difference. There needs to be a major investigation when Donald Trump is gone because of how bad his health is, and to see who knew what and when, and are they manipulating Donald Trump to get their way and do things that are against the American people in this. Because it certainly looks like that is what is going on here. That the American people have a clown in the Oval Office who is suffering from potentially major problems with dementia and things like that. And now you have people around him taking full advantage, just getting him to sign whatever. Democrats need to look into it when they're back in charge. Okay. One last thing I want to talk about before I wrap things up here. So we talked a lot already about how Democrats want to tack on the ACA subsidies onto this bill, and how the Democrats caved to Republicans. And one of the things I'm seeing is people talking about, one of the ways to fix it is they need new leadership. And I'm not trying to say I'm a Chuck Schumer fan. I thought he would have done a much better job. I was more excited when he became majority leader in 2020. And I'm not disillusioned enough to say that he needs to stay and he's the best majority leader we've ever had. However, before we make final judgment on Chuck Schumer, let's see if the Democrats pull it off and get the House to add on this Affordable Care Act subsidy plan, and that maybe there was some strategy here. Again, not saying it's a great strategy, and he let certain members of the Senate take the heat for not passing it right away. If this plays out, like we talked about, where the House gets it added, it goes back to the Senate, and it passes the Senate with the ACA subsidies in it, then, Democrats will look like geniuses for playing the Republicans, which is great. But still, we may need a different minority leader, or definitely by the time they are in the majority, we need to look at getting somebody different. One of the problems is with Chuck Schumer is his age. We need to start getting younger people in Congress. We're already seeing that with certain people. Now, Chuck Schumer is not as old as some of them, but still, we need somebody different in leadership. Because realistically, Chuck Schumer wasn't the greatest as far as being the leader in the Senate, regardless of how this shutdown plays out. But I will say, I will give them credit if this plays out the way I've been talking about and what I think could happen. Again, outside the box thinking, this is seeing how the moving parts are going here. And if the Democrats do get their way by leveraging the House against the Senate, that, maybe we don't need to give Democrats at least as much hate. Not saying Chuck Schumer deserves to be off the hook, but maybe we have to look at it and go, okay, they got the big win at the end, and give them a little bit of credit. So let's see how it plays out. I'm still thinking that they may get these ACA subsidies tacked on in the House yet. Like I said, Hakeem Jeffries is planning to ask for 3 years, and they may end up getting it, if not for no other reason than that they've promised to save Mike Johnson at least once when his party tries to get rid of him. And that may be enough to actually tack it on and, get it through the Senate, get it to Donald Trump's desk, and maybe by end of the week, middle of next week, government will be back open and we'll have a better idea of where insurance costs and stuff are going to be for next year. I think they get it. I'm hoping they get it done instead of waiting for that vote in December that was promised by John Thune, because there's no guarantee the House would actually take up anything about it. I think this is the best chances if they can get it tacked on today or tomorrow, as they are trying to amend this version coming from the Senate. So that's going to do it for the Analytical Iowan podcast today. I want to thank you for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow because there's always stuff to talk about. And unfortunately, with American politics, it hasn't been boring for a while. And I kind of wish we could go back to some old boring politics where things didn't change this drastically on a daily basis. So thanks for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.